Welcome to KidSketch. The Cabrillo Bridge is our subject today. The bridge was originally built in 1915 for the Panama, California Exposition and remains one of the city's most beloved and recognizable landmarks. The 916-foot span makes for a dramatic entry into Balboa Park. The bridge was designed and engineered by Frank Allen Jr. under the direction of architect Bertram Goodhue. Goodhue had originally proposed a three-arched bridge of Spanish colonial design inspired by this bridge in Spain. Turns out it was a little over the budget by about $7,000. Frank Allen's seven-arch bridge design, which was more of a Roman aqueduct style, was approved. Instructional engineer Thomas Hunter helped with that design. Allen proceeded with construction, which turned out to be over budget by $70,000, 10 times the amount Goodhue's was over budget. Cabrillo Bridge is a concrete and steel bridge consisting of 7 hollow box-like pedestals with the upper part cantilevering out to form arched openings. This multiple arched cantilever structure was highly innovative and was the first such bridge in California. Construction started in December 1912 and was carried out mostly by hand. Over 1 million board feet of redwood was used. And even though those columns are hollow, it used over 270,000 tons of concrete. The bridge was opened in April of 1914 and reserved only for pedestrians in those first 2 years. Today, the bridge spans over a freeway, but did you know in the early days it was over a cow pasture? Yep, originally called Cabrillo Canyon, the canyon was used to hold cattle and horses in the late 1800s. Then in 1915, they made it into a man-made lagoon so that there would be these pretty reflection pools. Unfortunately, mosquitoes were quick to infest the lily pad-covered waters, and they ultimately had to be drained. In 1948, the reflection pool was finally scrapped, and US 395, the Cabrillo Freeway, was laid. It's now known as State Route 163. Another fun fact, the bridge's 56-foot wide, 120-foot tall arches were the perfect fit for a 4-lane highway and median. Locals love this bridge so much that in 1975, the Cabrillo Bridge was added to the National Register of Historic Places. And then in 1986, it was designated a San Diego Historic Civil Engineering Landmark. It's also a great structure to sketch. Let's give it a try. Our sketch of the bridge is going to be in perspective. That means we're going to sketch that solid 3-dimensional object, the bridge, on a 2-dimensional surface, or paper, so that it looks, convincing. The concept of perspective is that objects closer to us appear larger, and objects farther away from us appear smaller. When those objects get so far away, they seem to vanish. The easiest way to illustrate perspective in real life is to stand in the middle of a straight road, being careful not to get hit by a car. When you do this, you'll notice how the sides of the road and the lines painted on it meet in one spot on the horizon. And the center line will go straight for that spot, and the lines on the side will angle in until they intersect. That point of intersection is called the vanishing point. The vanishing point will always be in line with your eye level as you look at something. It's also called the horizon line in perspective drawings. The orthographic projection lines are the lines that recede back to the vanishing point, and they'll do that whether they're above or at eye level line or below it. So how do these concepts of perspective apply to our bridge? Well, why don't we find the horizon line, the vanishing point, and some of those projection lines in our image? Let's start with the projection lines. Let's trace several of them back to where they begin. See how they all come to a point? Look, we found the vanishing point. And if you have the vanishing point, make a horizontal line through it, and you have your eye level line. Let's start our sketch by taking a look at our image. The predominant thing are the 5 arches. The 5th one is just the very top, but we've got a pretty dominant perspective going. So let's start by finding the vanishing point. I'm going to use a straight edge. You could use a folded piece of paper if you don't have it. Have a straight edge like this, and I'm just going to follow these lines back, sort of like reverse engineering. Take the top of the bridge, and then how about I line up all of the tops of these arches. There's this area where the arch stops and the column starts, and that's called a spring line, and it lines up. It's the same for all of the arches, and I can see that point. So I'm going to connect this point, and trace it backwards towards the vanishing point. And then you see where all of these are coming together. Where they meet, that's the vanishing point. These are the projection lines. We can find a few more. And as they all start to, as they keep falling on this, then you know you've got the vanishing point in the right spot. And from here, we can take our horizontal line and know that where the horizontal line is, that's our eye level line. So because I was on a hill, it's not that easy to automatically know where the horizon line is. So I was, this is the way that we can find it. All right, so let's with this piece of information in hand, let's go to our sketch and let's make a dot on the page. That's our vanishing point. A horizontal line is our eye level line. But how about these other lines? Well, the way that we would do it is that we'll approximate the angle. We know that they start at the vanishing point. We could use our eye and just do a judgment. We could use our pencil and see where that angle is. Well, let's do a few more. How about that spring line? It's just above the horizon line. So let's make a line that's just above the horizon line. And then how about the top of the arches? It's just a little bit below the top of the bridge. And we'll put it here for now, though we may need to adjust it later. We might need to adjust all of these later since we're just approximating. So the bottom of the column, this prominent one, that's our angle. Whoops, I wiggled. And so that gets us started. Well, now let's do something else that might help us. Let's set some parameters here for the left and the right side of our sketch. I'm going to do it about like this. And, we can use our pencil as a guide. It's about like that. And the reason I'm doing this is because I need to start somewhere. We need to start somewhere in placing these in our sketch and finding the relationship of each arch to the next arch. Because what we're going to find is that, let's say this is the middle one. Well, this one's a little bigger and this one's a little smaller. I could show you an interesting way to block it all out, but I'd like to keep it simple. So let's make a vertical line right about here in the middle of our sketch. And that's going to represent this line, which is the left side of this column between arch number 3 and 4. So if you've got that line, and you'll see that it's about the halfway point. And that's why I've picked it. So to the left of it, the left of this line, we're going to add this little arch. But how wide is it? How wide is it compared to how tall our columns are? Well, is it the width of your finger? It's about the width of my pinky. So, okay, now I've got my mark. And to the right of it is a column. To the left of it is a column that's a little bit bigger. So what I'd like you to do is find the width that you made your first arch, transfer it over to here, and then scoot that line over just a bit because this column is getting bigger. This arch is getting bigger. I keep calling it columns. All right. And then we've got the column between that. Let's do the next one. Make that mark. And now make that arch wider. And yes, I'm a little bit off here, but it's okay. All right, so now I've got 3 of the bays of these arches. Let me show you how we're going to how we're going to put the arch in there. We could just sketch in a half round like that. There's something else that I'd like to point out. Let's make an X through this one. That little rectangle between the spring line and the top of the arches. Make an X through it. And where those 2 lines cross, that's the center line of your arch. And it's the center line in perspective. So what that means is this back half is smaller than the front half because you're seeing it in perspective. Things that are farther away are smaller. And so that one, it's a little clearer that this side's a little bigger than that side. And that's where we want it. And that's where the top of the arch is. And so if you repeat it for these others, you'll get a more convincing sketch. The arches will be more convincing and a greater sense of depth. All right, let's do these last 2 little guys. So if I make it the same width, but a little smaller this time, I give it its little arch top. And the last one, make my mark and then make it smaller than that. And there, we've just mastered making arches in perspective. 5 of them. Now let's do a few more things. How about we put the dome in? Since we moved the left side of our sketch over, we'll be most likely moving the right side of our sketch over because this was our center, if you'll remember. I'm going to move the edge of my sketch. I'd like to block out this dome. It's just a little bit to the right of that last little arch. I'm eyeballing it. I also would like to check a few things, like how tall is it? It's just something floating there. If I were to use my ruler, it looks like the top of the dome itself is about equal to the center of this arch. So let's see how we did. Not bad. It's a little taller. And there's a funny little thing on top. And then the tower next to it. And the tower is very ornate. And it's like a series of boxes on top of boxes. So here's a rectangle, here's sort of a boxy form. The next one on top of it's a little smaller. On top of that's a little smaller. And then a dome and a little spire. You see that I've included in the reference photo a lot of tree area. But I get tired of drawing a lot of tree areas, so sometimes I don't include it. Up to you if you want to keep your edge here or if you want to move it over. So we'll start to add just some block out stuff for the trees. There's this interesting mass that's behind the bridge that's going to be helpful in defining the bridge. It's in silhouette, it's in the background, and the bridge is in front of it. And so there'll be background, the tower and those trees, the middle ground, which is the bridge. We'll do a little foreground as well, and we'll get to that in a moment. So the next thing I think we want to look at is the roadway underneath. And we're going to be concentrating, at least I'm going to be concentrating the sketch, not so much on all of this stuff. I'm going to ignore a lot of this stuff. But let's look at the roadway. The northbound, this is 163, Freeway 163, and it's the northbound side is the farthest away from us, and the southbound side is close to us. And you'll notice that it's running underneath the southbound is running underneath the second arch, northbound underneath this third arch. So what's underneath this first one is some landscaping, and we'll get to that in a moment. So to get the roadway in, you'll see it's at an angle, and the road sort of curves down. Part of it is perspective, and part of it is just there's a hill. But start with this second arch, at the base of the second arch, make a line. And to find the angle, you can eyeball it. It's not exact, so go ahead and just make it sort of loose and run it all the way through. We're going to erase parts of it later. Then at this back corner, you'll make another line like that. So that's the southbound lane. We'll be adjusting it because it's actually, the median is a little wider. Then at the back side of that column, we've got a line for the northbound lane. And here at the back side of this third arch, now we have the freeway in. Okay, let's add and subtract a few things. Taking that line out. I'm going to strongly encourage that you ignore this tree. And for our sketch, we're going to ignore these trees because I want it to be more about the bridge and less about how interesting a composition it is with that tree in there. You can add it, certainly, but I'm not going to. I'm going to make it more about the bridge. All right, and I am going to drop a line in there and drop a line in here. Okay, now what? Let's do the back sides of these arches. There's a lot of busyness happening underneath here, but it's in the shadow, and I'd like us to focus more on the overall steps rather than trying to, at this point, identify what all is happening underneath the bridge. It wasn't until I really studied the photo and actually did a 5 or 6 trial sketches that I realized just how much stuff is going on under there. And since it took me that long to notice it, we're going to ignore it for now. But the important thing is that there is a backside to these arches. These are almost more like tunnels underneath the bridge than a pair of columns underneath there. So let's just take them as very short tunnels. Let's start with this first one. If that tree were not there, this would be the leading edge of our arch. There, can you see it? And the back edge of what we're calling the tunnel is about halfway through. So there's about an equal amount of space that you can see through and equal to the part that is the tunnel. So let's sketch a vertical line in this arch bay. Let's go ahead and erase the things on this side of it. There's its bottom, where the tunnel hits the ground. All right, go up to the spring line with a straight line. You see there's our spring line. And now create another little arch that's similar to this one, but a little smaller. There. Does it look like a tunnel? Let's do the same thing with this next one. It goes back a little farther. That has to do, again, with the perspective. It's about, instead of being about halfway, it's more like 3/4 of the way back. So if you could make a line, vertical line, in that second arch bay, about right there. There's our spring line. And now another little curve. There's your second little tunnel. For the third one, it's a sliver, but let's put it in there because it'll help us see that these arches get smaller as it goes back. Great, nicely done. How about we talk about this arched opening? So the back side of it, I think the elevation has changed, and I think it's also these columns are landing not as low as these because there's this hillside here. And if you were to sketch a little line, a little diagonal line like that, that's the hillside. And so what's happening are these columns are getting shorter because they're going up the hill. And even the bottom of this one is partially up the hill already. So if you'll just pull it up a little bit, there's its little base, and then these guys going up the hill like that. There. And so that's not a vanishing point, that's a hillside. And we'll come back in after a bit and we'll add some sort of lines like that that say hillside. Because we tend to sketch in lines that follow sort of the slope of the topography. The one other tree that I do want us to look at is this tree here. And we're going to put him in our foreground. Our foreground are the things that are closest to us versus the background are the things that are way farthest away from us. And then this middle ground, which will be our bridge and that hillside, middle ground are everything in between. So for this tree, let's give ourselves the bottom of a sketch. Put it where you'd like to put it. Okay, and then we're going to start with the trunk of the tree. I'm going to make a couple of branches. We don't see the bottom of the tree, and I'm doing that on purpose. So I made a couple of branches. It's kind of a cool tree, that multi-trunk. And then on top of it, I'm going to put a blob like that. That'll be our tree. See how it is? I'm being sort of true to the tree. And we're using it because A, it's there, and B, it covers a lot of the hillside, and we don't know what's going on the hillside. So we're going to be blocking that out, and then eventually we'll come back and we'll add a few more details to it, a little more tonal value. And we're going to do the tonal value all at the same time, or as a step. All right, how about a little bit of the foreground here? You see there's sort of some bands of landscaping. There's what looks just like probably dirt closest to the road, and then a band of greenery, and they're probably native plants because in Balboa Park they would have planted as just on the side of the road here. They would have tried to keep it as natural as possible. And they're sort of, I want to say they're sort of spiky little things. Not their branches seem to be going upright. And so we're going to make our scribbles sort of upright like that. And maybe there's like a bush or something in the foreground that will just outline there. And so now we have the basic composition of what we're working on. The bridge, some things in the foreground, the background, silhouette. And now we can add a few more. We have our lines, our shapes. We can add a few more things. For example, you can see some things through those arched openings. There's a little bit of blue sky. I'm going to leave a little blue sky on this one as well, even though that tree's in the way. But there is a band of vegetation here that we can see. And we'll go ahead and add that because we can see it through there. And they're caused by some trees that are growing in the median. And so if you want to put some tree trunks, keep them really little in the median, you can do that. And make sure you land them in the median and not in the road. I'm going to add a little tonal value just to help you see what it is we're doing. So I'm going to shade those in. And I think what that does is it helps us see what's happening with those arches. Speaking of what's inside, it's actually, there are a column in the front with an arch on top. There's a column in the back. And then they're connected by a solid section that has another arch. Way too much way too much detail for our sketch, but what is important is the way the shadows are hitting the bridge. It really accentuates the fact that it's not a tunnel, it's a series of columns. So we're going to keep it pretty simple. I'm going to have you sketch, starting with this second arch, a vertical line about not quite halfway back. And I'd like you to make two lines close together like that. And then lightly put an arch up there and another arch, and they should be smallish. Do the same thing with this, the one closest to us, two lines close together. We're going to try to downplay this in a little bit, but we need these two lines when we start to add our shadows that are being cast by the front of the bridge. We don't need it so much for these ones going up the hill, but we might as well add them while we're at it. All right, now we get the shadow line. If you'll see that the sun is casting a shadow right at that spring line. So the arch is casting a shadow down across the column. Find your spring line point, make a diagonal line. It should be the same diagonal, same angle for all of these columns, all right? Then what happens is everything inside the arches is going to get shaded except that front edge of that first column. I'm going to start shading a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about. And at this point, I'm making my shadow uniform, and then I'm going to talk more about the fact that part of the shadow is going to be darker still. So if you'll shade in, and think of it as a sort of a layering effect when it comes to the shadows, because we're going to come back in, add some lines, remove some lines, so that your sketch reads as a series of arches and in perspective. This is behind us. I'm just adding a little bit of tone to it. As you can see, it helps to make the shape of that bridge pop. So if it's vegetation, it gets crazy lines. If it's hillside, it gets these fun diagonal lines. If it's in the foreground here, We're not giving it any lines. I think we're ready to go to the next level. To finish the shadows, I'm going to lighten up a couple of these. And we're going to do something a little different today. We're going to stay in pencil. The first thing I'd like us to build up then to concentrate on are the shadows for these arches. Originally, when we first did them, we made them sort of uniform from top to bottom, front to back. But actually, when you start it darker at the top, what it does is the arch starts to turn. Can you see it starting to, the arch is starting to look a little more arch-like? I'm keeping the lines horizontal. We want them to look arch-like. We want to be careful we're not turning it into a ball. And so for each of them, I'm adding that tone there. And then we're going to add a little more, and a little more, and a little more. It's kind of fun working in pencil because it feels a little safer sometimes. Like if you make a mistake, you can get out your eraser. Things are a little more gradual. But the important thing to remember when working in pencil is you're going to have to make an effort to get those darks really dark. This is a good time to squint at your sketch and see how it looks. Is it coming together okay? Now I'd like us to go down the columns. If you'll notice, it gets a little darker in there because it's like two walls of arches sort of tied together. If you'd like a little bit of differentiation in there, you could go ahead and put that in. Be careful with that little extra tone in there because we don't want it to start dominating. We're not trying to say too much about what's happening back there. But we do need to get this back column a little darker. And just keep checking your work and seeing, does it look like what you're looking at? Does it look sort of like your photo? And that's how you know how you're doing. It's just a function of adding a few more things, a few more tones. Let's maybe focus on the roadway. That median is a little wider, so the lines, you can go back and sort of boost up your lines and push them away from the base of the columns because the median's got a little more stuff in it. We could add the shadow that's falling on the ground underneath the bridge. Do you see it going across there? It's just a little sort of a sliver right through there. Maybe connect the back sides of those columns. And I tend to like to make my shadow lines go with whatever surface it's hitting. So in this case, it's a roadway, so I'm making horizontal lines as my shadows. There's a little bit in the hill. It also looks like it looks a little, like you can see between these two columns quite a bit. I'm seeing some of the hill. And that also helps your columns read. If you'd like to give a little more, maybe a little more punch to the vegetation, those trees in the median, Probably shouldn't have made them as dark as I did. If you wanted to keep yours lightened up, you could. And that's what our kneaded eraser is for. So if you decide it's too dark, lighten it up. Also working with pencil, there's something that you can do, and that is to smudge. And that helps if you have an area that's too dark, you can lighten it up by smudging it. Let's go back in and add some little bit of a definition in some of these areas. Like, so the foreground, maybe darken up just a little. The edge of the road, you'll see it through the trees. We're not putting, I'm trying not to put anything on the roadway or the face of the bridge, and we'll actually come back and erase some things. Those are the lightest, that's where the sun is hitting. It's a concrete, 163 in this area is made of concrete, whereas a lot of roadways are made of asphalt, and so that the concrete is very light in color. I'm trying to pull up that shadow line so it's not so much a hard line. It's just a shadow line. So the median, I'm just going to give it a little tone. And it helps bring this tree into the foreground a little more. I might erase anything that I put on the roadway. And then I can keep working on the landscaping in the foreground. This is where you can use lines that have a lot of character. And also this is showing the fun of a pencil, is because you can use the side of the lead and get some wide lines that then as you flick up, they get skinnier. Really hard to do if you're working in ink. So this is fun in pencil. And then the farther away they get from you, the smaller they'll be, but those in the foreground are going to be nice and big. Now I'm going to sharpen my pencil a little bit and add some detail to the tree trunks in the foreground. I might add some of the branches that break off. See, there's like some thin ones, and give it some definition. And I might even put some curved lines to show, see, the tree is sort of growing away from us and the branches are curved. And then if you feel like you've made it too prominent, use your kneaded eraser and lighten them up, or smudge. Now let's get to the foliage. You can make curly lines, scratchy lines. It's the edge of the tree and it's just indicating foliage. A lot of these trees, they seem to have leaves, but they also have like some branches where the leaves are, maybe the branch died. And there's a lot of them around here. Maybe that's just the nature of a eucalyptus tree. You can give a hint to those if you want. Then, so after you get sort of your bunches of leaves, you'll add some darker areas that suggest it's the underside of the leaves. You're looking at the under canopy of the tree. I think even regardless of what sort of level of detail you're trying to add to your sketch, you won't see me really choking up on my pencil. It's not like handwriting. See, I'm pretty far back on the pencil, even though I'm doing some things that might suggest a little extra detail. Sometimes I like to make sort of big loopy lines on the edges of the trees. That just, I think there's something happening in there. Something happening in there, but I don't want to have to go into each leaf. Okay, I think our middle ground could use a little more tonal value. And I'm just basically repeating the lines that are already there, just darkening it up a bit. And to show that there's layers, lots of trees. Now let's get to this part up here, and then I think we're just about finished. We want this tree to have the least amount of detail, really, but it still needs a little bit of lights and darks. And the reason I say it wants the least amount of detail is because it's the farthest away, and we only know what we can see sort of as little silhouettes. And we see little clumps of leaves sort of above it, and sort of an area of darkness. Something like that. Then, okay, back to our tower. I'm keeping the right side light because the sun is hitting that dome. And the left side, I'm adding a little bit of tone, but not much, because where is the focus of our sketch today? It's really about the bridge. It's just, we can't really ignore how cool that dome is beyond there, and how cool the tower is. And if you were there when you're sketching, I'm on the path. I walked through the dog park, and I'm on the path heading down that goes down and around. There's a lot of great places to hike around in there. You'll hear the church bells. These are the things that you remember later when you see your sketch. 20 years later, the noise from the freeway is actually not that noticeable. At least I didn't think it was, even though the cars are going right by me. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention, but I did hear how cool the bells were when they would chime. Okay, the side of that tower, you can see a little bit of the side of the tower, and it's in perspective and it follows the same rules. And so the edges go back to the vanishing point like that. So if you would like to make your tower look a little more realistic, you could add that side. You don't need to put any shadow on that side because it's in the sun. But you could maybe hide those lines. Was curious about the bells, so I researched once I got home, and they're from the California Tower, but the tower doesn't actually have a bell. I guess I was a little disappointed to learn that it's a recorded sound of bells chiming out on the hour. Just adding a few more things. A lot of times we'll add these fun little lines to suggest the sky. Sometimes we add little birds. You kind of know it's the sky. You could make a little darker line up near the top. See, you see the edge of the bridge, and then there's a little a little lip or an overhang, and that's that. So there's a light line and then a darker line, and you can add that in if you want. Doing any hints at details. That little light fixture might just be something tiny like that. Let's try this one. I think we're done. Cabrillo Bridge. San Diego, August